Hello. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Krawczyk, and I am delighted to welcome you all to this special event. Today we have the privilege of speaking with Professor David Nutt. I loved your book, and I'm happy that you're here today. Here's a renowned British psychiatrist and psychopharmacologist. It's a long word.
It's a very long. Actually, it's neuropsychopharmacologist, if you really want to test yourself.
Currently, he's a professor at Imperial College London as well, and his research primarily focuses on addiction, anxiety, and sleep. And you served as an advisor to the UK Ministries of Defence, Health and Home Office.
Yeah, they never took any notice.
And you were the chair of the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, and you lost your job.
I was sacked, that's right. For saying that alcohol was more harmful than cannabis. So if you don't want to hear the truth, you may as well leave now.
But now you're a chair of drug science, the UK's leading independent scientific body on drugs, guiding evidence-based drug policy and research, right?
But certainly driving it, but not necessarily getting any traction.
And additionally, I've heard you own a wine bar or a vineyard. Is that correct, or both?
No, just a bar, just a bar. Where I live in the West Country, it's very difficult to grow decent grapes. And then when the ones I've tried to grow, the dogs always eat, so it never turns into wine.
Do you often find yourself having to explain yourself for running this wine bar?
Yeah, it's called Children. So my daughter was, as I don't know how many. Some of you have probably been on the stage, won't you? You'll have. We have this famous joke in Britain. What do you call a failed actor? Garçon. Okay, so she was on the stage and no longer on the stage, and she wanted. So we have this joke in Britain. What do you call an actor that's no longer acting? Garçon, because they're serving. So she's always been good at. In sort of the front of house, and she said, "Dad, I think we need to have." She lived in West London. She said, "We need to have somewhere where women can go and drink alcohol without being pestered by drunk men and without having to watch soccer." So I said, "Well, that's a good plan." She said, "Just can you give me some money so I can rent a place to set up a woman's only wine bar?" I said, "That's illegal, actually. You can't not allow men into the wine bar." But she came up with a very clever ploy, which was basically having no music, no TV, and expensive wine. So that kept the men out. And in West London, the women in their 20s and 30s who wanted to go and socialise with their friends came, and it became actually really very popular. And it's now become quite famous. It's called Pulp. And if you go to London and you want to have some nice organic wine, it's just south of Ealing Broadway Tube Station, which is on the Elizabeth line on the way back to Heathrow. There you go.
So now you all know. I hope you made notes. Let's talk about your book in English. It was out in 2020, and it was called Drink, ? And the New Science of Alcohol and Your Health. And now it's available in Polish, and it was translated by Maciej Lawrence here. And I have to say, I love the new, the Polish title, which can be translated back to English, to drink or not to drink. Yeah. It sounds very Shakespearean, doesn't it?
Yeah, I wish I'd come up with that title.
So it's like posing one of the most fundamental existential questions, right? Absolutely. So is drinking really an existential question? How significant is alcohol in consumption on our general health? Is it such an important, big question?
Well, I suppose it's alcohol is now, according to 4 separate independent expert groups, a UK one, a European one, an Australian one, and a New Zealand one. They've all published data using same methodology. Alcohol is the most harmful drug in all those jurisdictions. So if you care about harm, you should try to reduce the amount people drink. There's no doubt about it.
One of the most important concepts that you introduce in the book is they're called microlives, and you introduced it to quantify the impact of alcohol. So can you explain this concept, and how does it help to understand, like how alcohol affects us?
Yeah, this is a really clever concept. It was invented by a man called David Spiegelhalter, who is the head statistician in the UK. And he was looking at how could you compare the harms of all sorts of different things. How could you compare the harms of drink, say, or tobacco smoking with the harms of walking across a road or mountain climbing? And he came up with this concept of a micro-death. How many events do you have to do to get to a death? And it turns out that the most dangerous thing you can do is ride a motorcycle, because I think it's about every 10 micromorts, every 10 kilometers, you run the risk of harming yourself. On an ordinary pedal cycle, it's about 20. And then you can compare that to things like smoking and drinking. So it's a very clever way of trying to scale across very different forms of harm.
How do you scale drinking in terms of micro lives? Like if you drink, let's say every day, can you measure how it shortens your life?
Yeah, so I did it in the book, and you'll find there's a table. And I'll give you a little warning. If you drink more than a bottle of wine a day, do not open that page. Get someone else to do it. Alcohol is much more difficult to estimate than most other harms because it's not linear. And this is really important. Doubling the consumption of alcohol more than doubles the harm. So, for instance, if you go from half a bottle of wine a day to 1 bottle of wine a day, you double your consumption, but you increase the harms by about 4-fold. And then if you go from 1 to 2, then it goes up by about 12-fold. So then you can do, and what I did in the book was then look at how many months or years of life you would lose if you were drinking like that over a period starting from the age of 18. And the answer is, don't ever drink more than a bottle of wine a day because you'll lose 10 years of your life.
So we are in the book, you enlist how alcohol affects us in long term. It's a quite big list. I just enumerated here. It affects brain, it affects our sleep, it affects our sex life, it affects our life expectancy, digestion, mental health. Just to name a few, it's hard to find an area of life like that it wouldn't affect. But yeah, correct. Many of us still choose to drink, and sometimes excessively. So there must be some benefits to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit the nail completely on the head. The reality is, most of us, anyone here not drink? So very few. So most of you. Oh, more than I would have thought. Oh, okay. Is it? Okay. But anyway, normally about 80% of the adult population in most Western countries drink alcohol. But the vast majority drink because they want to. Maybe 15% are addicted, and so they're compelled to drink. But the vast majority drink because they want to. So why do you want to drink? Well, I think those of you who've drunk, and I presume even some of the current non-drinkers have drunk. Why did you first drink? And the answer is almost always in social situations. And alcohol is par excellence the most social drug. It's the drug that is best able to help humans get over the anxiety that we all have in meeting strangers. And that's an inherited human trait, which is very useful because it's generally better to be cautious of people you don't know than to be over-enthusiastic with them. But if you're very cautious with people you don't know, you might never ever meet someone that you want to have children with. And alcohol, I think almost every person who got into a relationship has used alcohol to facilitate that first interaction. So it is the ultimate social drug, and we're absolutely social creatures. I mean, look at here, all these people crammed together in a room like this. If I wasn't speaking, you'd all feel very awkward. If I start talking to someone you don't know, you wouldn't want to do that at all, because but you do want to be. We are a social species, so alcohol facilitates that sociability, and that gets to the heart of what I'm trying to do at present, which is I touch on it a little in the book. It's about if we can find ways of increasing sociability using other chemicals that wouldn't be as harmful as alcohol. And that's my last great ambition, to provide all you young people with something that you can use socially. It wouldn't harm you like alcohol. And I can leave the world a better place than I found it.
So I'm sure that you have in mind like a list of harmful effects. So far, working on alternatives, what kind of harmful effects of alcohol we can get rid of?
Well, we can get rid of almost all of them. We can get rid of pretty much all of the health effects, because that's not difficult. The challenge actually is not to find something that I could give you in a drink that would make you feel you drunk alcohol. That's easy. The problem is getting people to fund the research to prove that it's safe. That's way much more difficult, because that means going through food safety testing, which actually has never been achieved for any new food in Europe, which is one reason we're doing it in America, because at least in America, they have a process which says if you comply with these safety regulations, you are allowed to sell it. In Europe, when you go to the European Food Standards Agency, they say if you comply with these criteria, we might consider it. And then when you say to an investor, well, would you give us 5 million euros to try to get something through European food safety, they say, you might. Whereas in America, if you pass the test, you will be approved. So at some point in the future, and hopefully it will be on the market in America, and then hopefully the European regulations will become a bit more rational.
One thing when we talk about harmful effects is aggression, for example,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So I can imagine that you can get rid of in a chemical way, but the other issue is dependence. It's getting addicted to alcohol.
Yes.
Can you get rid of that?
Yes, you can, because alcohol is what we call a very promiscuous drug. It's a very small molecule. It interacts with many of the chemicals in the brain we call neurotransmitters. It also interacts with proteins in the brain as well. And it does that because it's a very small molecule. You can kind of stick into any little gaps that there are. If we make a slightly bigger molecule that is targeted at just one of the neurotransmitters, the neurotransmitter we're targeting is called GABA. GABA is the brain's calming neurotransmitter. It relaxes the brain. That's the first impact of alcohol. When the first drink gets in the brain, you calm down because alcohol is turning on GABA. We make a small molecule that does that, but we can, as we have achieved, we can make it very selective, not just for GABA, but also for subtypes of GABA that only work in certain parts of the brain. And that's how we can avoid parts of the brain which are associated with aggression or with hangover or with dependence. And then we can really, and it's not trivial, by the way, it's taken us a long time to invent these molecules, but we've also can develop ones which will only have a ceiling effect. So even if you drank vast amounts, you could never get really drunk. And we also are making molecules which don't stay for very long in the body. So even if you were to get drunk, the effect would wash out quite quickly.
Trying to grasp, because when I was doing research before the meeting, in a lot of stories I've written, there was a phrase, the problem with alcohol, the problem with drugs.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, like, what is actually the problem, and what kind of problem we can solve with some alternatives, and what kind of problem we cannot solve, right?
Well, I think you touched on the first one earlier on, which was the violence and aggression. So I don't know what the numbers are in Poland, but I imagine they're pretty similar. In Britain, it costs the state about 8 billion euros a year just to police drunkenness. And it costs about 3.5 billion to deal with all the healthcare costs. So alcohol-induced disorder and violence is a massive, massive problem. And that violence leads to a lot of other damage, particularly head injury. A significant young number of chronically brain-damaged, usually young men, are brain-damaged because they got into fights when they were drunk, or they drove their cars into trees when they were drunk. So we could get rid of an awful lot of that harm, that social harm and that personal harm from reducing intoxication.
I remember from your book that it significantly heightens dementia as well, right?
Right?
So I'm just wondering, like, do we expect like some kind of epidemic of dementia? As like life expectancy goes up, alcohol consumption goes up. So does it mean that we'll have?
We're not expecting it. We're seeing it. I mean, we're seeing it in the USA, where you have this bizarre phenomenon. The richest country in the world, middle-aged men are dying younger. And that's partly because they're very overweight and partly because they're drinking too much. And it's not impossible that other countries, again, that as they get more disposable income, that people may actually go down the same route as the US, particularly the Midwest.
Let's talk about addiction once again, because like there's a lot of information in the book, like what we know thanks to science. And one of those questions that a lot of people ask is, do we finally know what causes addiction? Is it like genetics, upbringing, or is it like availability of alcohol? Do we know? Is there a simple answer to that?
No.
The complicated one?
The complicated one is that addiction is a mix. So when you were talking about addiction, we're talking about people who generally can't abstain, people who seek out alcohol and use it in the face of obvious problems that they themselves know, or certainly that their partners and their friends and workmates know. So why do they do that? And the reason it's a complicated answer is because it's for different reasons. So there are some people, particularly those who start drinking later in life, who are drinking to deal with stress and anxiety and depression, often after something like a divorce or losing their job. And they become physically dependent on alcohol, so that that means that they can't stop. Then you've got another group, who usually young men who start drinking when they're very young, who drink because they like to get high. It releases dopamine, and it's a sort of mild cocaine-like buzz. And then after a while of doing that, the world seems flat until they drink. And then there's a third group which are the binge drinkers, who start off saying, they know they binge, they know that they have these episodes of pulsatile drinking, heavy drinking, and they start off with the intention of controlling their drinking. But after a couple of drinks, the alcohol in their brain releases endorphins, and the endorphins drive the craving for more, so they lose control after a couple of drinks. So you've got three separate groups of people who can end up with addiction. Yeah,
the last one rings a bell, definitely. And the science know effectively treat addiction? Do we know that? Like how to approach addiction, that we can guarantee a person, okay, if you use this and that, you'll treat your addiction?
No, we can't say categorically, but one of the reasons I emphasized the different feeders into alcohol use and addiction is because some of them you can treat. So, for instance, if someone is drinking because they are chronically anxious, you can help them deal with the anxiety in other ways. And actually, I mean, this is actually quite common in young men. So a quarter of all young male alcoholics have got what we call social anxiety disorder. They are so anxious in meeting, particularly members of the opposite sex, that they have to drink in order to engage in any social activity. And then they become dependent on alcohol, which then aggravates the anxiety. So if we could treat them with other approaches, and that means that they don't need to rely on alcohol. But when you get dependent on alcohol and you start craving it, then you're in a different mindset. And we don't have many. We have some drugs. We have a drug called acamprosate, which can help reduce craving. Perhaps it helps in about 10% of people. We have drugs like naltrexone or nalmefene, which can help reduce the endorphin drive to binge. But we really don't have any highly effective drugs for alcohol now.
I'm sure that in Poland, the most popular approach to treating alcohol addiction is giving up drinking entirely, right? It's probably similar all over the world. I don't think there is a place where there is like some majority of that, right? No. But as we all know, like it does work well for some people. It definitely doesn't work well for everyone. Some people just go through a cycle of rehabs and detoxes. And is there a feasible alternative for them, for those who does not want to give up alcohol entirely?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the other potential advantages that we have, if we could do, when we have already, when we're selling it now in America and in Britain, we've developed a herbal drink called Sentia, which mimics the impact of a low dose, so maybe half a glass of wine, half a beer, through increasing the GABA system. Some people are beginning to use that now deliberately so that they can drink socially but not get drunk. So having viable alternatives that people enjoy drinking, I think, that's a crucial way of beginning to undermine this, huge population problem of excessive drinking. So I'm hoping, in another generation or two, the drinking problem will be a lot less than it is today.
And I know that there is a growing interest in using psychedelics to treat alcohol addiction. Do we know, or does science know something for sure about those treatments? Are they effective?
Yeah, well, that's a topic that's very close to my heart, because we started resurrecting psychedelic research in the UK about 20 years ago, and we began to study their use in disorders like depression and anorexia. But as we began to learn more, we realized historically there was a fascinating period in the 1960s when LSD was legal, when it was used to treat alcoholism. In fact, it's not generally well known, but the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, escaped from his alcohol dependence in a psychedelic trip. And afterwards, when LSD became available, he became convinced that LSD could be used to help alcoholics achieve this necessary insight, which is seeing that there is more to life than the bottle. And because at that point, Alcoholics Anonymous was a very powerful international concept, and he was very famous and he had influence, he persuaded the US government to fund 6 trials where alcoholics were given abstinence-based therapy and 1 dose of LSD. And then they were followed up for weeks or months. And about 10 years ago, 2 Norwegians went back and analyzed those data, which generally weren't well known. And they got all the source data out, and then they did what we call a meta-analysis. They put it all together and said, how did it really work? And it was amazing. That 1 dose of LSD was 3 times more effective at maintaining abstinence than any treatment we have licensed today for alcoholism. Staggering. So why aren't we using it? Well, we're not using it because LSD.
Why aren't we using it? You were so close to the government, like a few ministers I could name, and I'm sure you presented them this evidence. And what's their answer?
Well, the answer is that
they fired you. That's their answer.
They fired me. They fired me. LSD has been given such a bad rap that you cannot have a rational discussion with a politician about LSD. You cannot. I mean, I could give you examples, but it drives politicians mad. So that's one of the reasons, by the way, our research is mostly on psilocybin, because politicians don't know what it means. They don't know how to spell it, and they don't know how to say it. So it's a bit hard. But LSD is so easy to attack. But yes, I've been campaigning to try to. Well, why am I here? I'm not here just because of you wonderful people here, but I'm actually here in Warsaw talking about how we can start developing psychedelic therapy for the treatment of particularly Ukrainians who've been traumatized in the war. Because there's a great deal of hope that psychedelics and MDMA can help with PTSD. But there's progress also still being made in the US. There is now a large study conducted a couple of years ago using 2 doses of psilocybin in people with alcoholism, comparing it with an active placebo to try to blind it. And there you have powerful effects in the modern era of a psychedelic for alcohol dependence. And that's so powerful that that's going to be rolled out into what we call a phase 3 study. So it's quite plausible that within a few years, psilocybin may be a treatment for alcoholism as well as we hope for depression.
Is there a way to explain that quite easily, how psychedelics, LSD or psilocybin, can support the addiction treatment? Because we usually think about drugs and treatment like those ads for painkillers. You take a pill and it solves the problem magically, and the ad ends in 30 seconds. You're happy and don't feel pain anymore. Yeah. I assume it's not the same with the other psilocybin, right?
No, the psychedelic approach to treatment is fundamentally different in a number of ways. The first is it's usually just 1 or 2 doses. And that has huge advantages because it means that people are not taking a medicine on a daily basis, so they're not getting side effects on a daily basis. The problem is that's a disincentive to drug companies, because up till now, they've made their money giving someone a pill every day for the rest of their lives, if they could. So and that actually makes it quite challenging, because the big pharma won't invest in the research that's necessary. But the rules for getting a drug licensed are the rules that were set by big pharma. So if you can't raise, to get a drug approved, you've got to raise at least $1 billion. And the only people that can afford that are big pharma. So we're in a bit of a catch-22 here. But the second thing is about mechanisms, and the mechanisms are fundamentally different. And what's really exciting about psychedelics is that they don't dampen down the processes of intoxication from alcohol or the process of withdrawal. What they do is they disrupt the circuit that leads you to carry on doing things that you don't want to do. They break the thought loops, which say, I've got to have a drink. Or even the behavior loops, because many people who drink don't even want to drink, but they find themselves drinking and realize they've been drinking. And psychedelics can sort of reset the brain from a state where it always does the same thing to a state where it can do things differently. And that gives people a chance to truly sort of escape from that old way of thinking and have a new kind of life.
So how can we be sure what kind of loop will be affected? Because we are in different behavior loops, we have different habits.
Yeah, yeah.
Is there? Are we afraid that we will all stop working? We'll all stop, I don't know, using shower or like working out. That's also like some loops that we have, that we do it on autopilot.
It's interesting. You know, we're looking at that data now in our study with anorexia, because some people with anorexia use exercise as a way of keeping weight down, and that becomes compulsive, and it's conceivable we could disrupt any kind of compulsive behavior. But the good news is that psychedelics, they only seem to help you go where you want to go. They will not force someone to be a different kind of person. They won't make you vote for the right wing if you want to vote left. That was tried. It was called MK Ultra, and Americans tried very extensively to use psychedelics to brainwash people. You cannot do that. What psychedelics do is allow people who want to change and stay changed.
I also want to cover like other alternatives we haven't mentioned so far for treating drug addiction. I know there is there were some trials around substitution treatment for alcohol.
Yes.
It works for opioid addiction. In Warsaw, we have places where people, dependent on opioids, they could use methadone or buprenorphine to limit harms. How does it work with alcohol? Is it like something
It is possible. It is possible. Unfortunately, there is a treatment out there. It was invented in Sardinia called sodium oxybate. It's been used in Italy for 30 years. It's been used in Austria for about 15 years. It's licensed in those countries. But when the company tried to get it licensed in Europe, it was turned down. And it was turned down because it was not harmless. It's not as harmful as alcohol, but it does have harms. And
what kind of harms?
Similar to alcohol. You can be sedated, you can be unsteady, you can be dependent. So it is like methadone, which is used because it's less harmful than heroin. But the European Medicines Agency refuses to allow it. And there's a fascinating situation. The company, it's a French company, went to the European Court of Justice, and the European Court of Justice said, yes, the Medicines Agency was wrong. It actually did not apply its own rules. The company had enough evidence of the benefits of this treatment that they should have licensed it. But the European Court of Justice has no control over the European Medicines Agency. So it's now, and for most countries in Europe, it's denied. And I think that sums up one of the big issues we have. One of the reasons it's been much more difficult to deal with the problem of alcohol is because so many people drink, and a lot of people drink normally. So they say those people who have problems with alcohol have problems because they're weak people. You know, it's not an illness. It's just that you're just lazy or you can't pull yourself together. So the stigma against drinkers is really much more pervasive than the stigma, for instance, against heroin addicts.
I remember being in Vienna, where there is a drug commission that they meet every year over there, and there was a delegation from Russia, and they advertised their way of treating addiction, and it was basically treating weakness with kickboxing camps. And because that's exactly how they perceived addiction. But it was considered there as something, let's say, exotic in a sense. But this approach that underlies this idea of kickboxing camps, you say that it is also present in Poland, in the UK, that addiction is weakness. Do we still consider it like that?
Well, you wouldn't find people to stand up and say, I believe that alcoholics are just weak people. but subconsciously, unconsciously, I think they must believe it, because that's why it is so difficult to get any kind of sensible change, both in terms of treatment, but also in terms of attitude to drinking. You know, it's changing regulations, trying to improve through small steps, to reduce the harms of alcohol, edging people to drink less, maybe to drink more expensive alcohol. There are many simple things one could do to reduce the harms of alcohol that most governments don't do. My government failed for 15 years. One of the reasons I was sacked was because I said, basically, look, you know, they were getting hysterical about some of the new psychoactive substances like bath salts, which were hardly harming anyone. And it was a deliberate plan. Governments ignore alcohol because the drinks industry pay them, and the public want to keep drinking. So it's a big hurdle, but it would be simple to make small moves to improve the outcomes.
I'm sure that you still remember the moment you were informed, you fired for, and you felt that you were speaking the truth. Yes. Back then. Can you tell us more about that? What was it like? Were you like informed by email, or someone like tell you, okay, that's too much?
Yeah, actually, well, I was. Funnily enough, I was about. I remember it vividly because it was an afternoon, and I was part of we'd set up a research group to study alcohol and the harms of alcohol and look for new ways of treating alcohol addiction. And I was about to give a talk on my research at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And at about 3:30 in the afternoon, I got an email from the Home Office from my secretariat saying they would like you to resign. And I wrote back, I'm not going to resign. You know, why should I resign? You know, I've just told the truth about drugs. And I got another email. He said, you misunderstand. You know, you're sacked. And that was a bit chilling. So I had about 10 minutes. And what I did was I wrote an email and I sent it to every single media person I had in my media my media file in my emails. And then I gave my talk. It was a bit unsteady. It wasn't one of my best talks. And at 5 o'clock, I left the building. And when I got outside, there was a BBC camera crew, ITV camera crew, Sky camera crew. And we spent the evening just lambasting the government because they never expected anyone to fight back. So in hindsight, I think I did quite a good job.
There was one reason for that, like mentioned in the email. It was specifically about alcohol, or your like views on other psychoactive substances played a part as well?
They said I was lobbying against government policy. I was saying, hang on, I'm your chief scientist. I can't, you employed me to tell you what the policy should be, not the other way round. My job is not to defend your policy, it's to change your policy. But there was an election coming up. Things go crazy when elections are coming.
Unfortunately, we don't have such power here as British government. But anyway, I'm going to ask you for policy advice on alcohol. Actually, today is a big day for the Polish debate around regulating alcohol, because there's a high-profile court case regarding the advertisement of alcohol on social media. And 2 celebrities are charged with advertising alcohol, which is illegal in traditional media. And legal experts also argue that it's also illegal on social media. But there's a huge difference. Like, you wouldn't see any advertisement until 10 o'clock on TV or radio. And after that, I think it's only beer. But in social media, you see a lot of ads. And I'm sure that there is no conclusion to this case after today, but it started. And tell me, should we really care about like those alcohol advertisements? Is it do we know, or does science know how it translates to the issues with alcohol we discussed? Or is it just an easy target, like to charge celebrities for advertising booze?
Well, I think it's a good target, because they were taking money for doing it, weren't they? I mean, they weren't doing it for free, I'm sure. I mean, that is kind of outrageous. But the reality is, drinks industry say advertising alcohol does nothing other than allow people to choose between different forms of alcohol. Whereas we know from vast amounts of research that European organizations have been doing for the last 15 years, that the advertising alcohol is the main way people start to think they should drink. And it is actually staggering how drinks companies, through social media, have managed to get under 10-year-olds completely aligned with the principles of drinking in relation to sport. They've done it. It's illegal, the way they've encouraged their supporters on the internet to do that, but they've done it systematically, and it's almost impossible to stop them. And I think, so I'm really pleased that that lawsuit is going ahead, because it is outrageous. Though it's not, they should not be advertising on social media to under 18-year-olds, but they do it, and they do it systematically, and they really achieve enormous penetration, even, as I say, down to 10-year-olds. So, yeah, you should ban all alcohol advertising everywhere, like you have with tobacco advertising.
I'll keep you posted about the case. Probably it will take about 2 years in Polish courts or even more, but I'll let you know. There is another idea under debate right now. The Minister of Health in Poland, she announced that the idea of banning alcohol sales at gas stations could become a law soon. And so what's your opinion on banning those 24/7 shops? Is it important to battling issues with alcohol?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just laughing because about 10, 12 years ago, my government changed the law to allow the selling of alcohol at gas stations. And
what was rationale for that, actually? Like, people just wanted like more personal freedom. What was like what was the reason because they changed law like that they allow. That's what I understood, right?
They changed the law to, well, the reason was because the drinks industry asked them to. You can't believe how much the drinks industry corrupts British politics. I bet it corrupts your politics as much. But the drinks industry has become extremely clever. After the tobacco industry got exposed for lying, the drinks industry came up with a whole new strategy. And the strategy is not about lying. They say things like, drink responsibly. I mean, what's the point? They put the blame on the drinker, even though we know 15% or so of drinkers can't control themselves. And they also fuel money into politicians through the hospitality industry rather than through the drinks industry. So they're extremely clever. They lobby all the time, and they just wanted to increase their sales. So we argued that was the most dangerous place to be drinking is when you're driving on a motorway. And so that way we thought it was outrageous to allow those sort of sales. So I'm really pleased to hear that you might be actually moving in the right direction, which is to ban them.
So what else should we take into consideration? Let's imagine like the Polish government would would like to hire you as the advisor, and they would ask you, Professor Nutt, what should we do?
Well, I could actually give you a document which I wrote for the Lithuanian government about 6 years ago, where they had an interesting situation where they had a psychiatrist who was actually the health minister, and he was very worried about alcohol harms. And Lithuanians drink even more than Poles, and they brought in a number of constraints on alcohol, which has actually reduced the damage from alcohol there. But if you want to go further, if you want to get what I would consider the most logical policy, certainly in Europe, is the Swedish policy. So the Swedes have this system called the Systembolaget, where basically, if you want to drink strong liquor at home, you have to go and buy it from a state shop. You can obviously drink strong liquor in bars, but then at least if you're really drunk, they'll stop serving you. And the Systembolaget has been around now for about 40 years, I think. And it's been remarkable because it does a couple of really critical things. One of the pieces of advice I give you in the book is to think about drinking. Now, in Sweden, if you want to drink at home, you have to think to the point where you have to go to the shop. Well, it's more like a giant supermarket to buy your booze, and the shops are open between 9 and 5. They've started opening them on Saturday mornings now. But it's a conscious decision. That's the first thing. You can't suddenly rock up at a supermarket at 2 in the morning or a gas station and get yourself a load more booze. And then the other thing they've obviously done is they've made it quite expensive. So the Swedes have the Swedish government is the largest buyer of wine in the world, and in fact, because they have such buying power, the wines you buy in Sweden are very high quality. So and that's the secret. You want more expensive booze that you have to think about drinking. And Sweden now has alcohol consumption half of what we have in Britain, and they have about a third of the health harms. So that's, and that's because of this non-linear relationship between consumption and harm. So that's to my mind, that's the model. And that's the kind of model that probably happened here. I don't know, when did you start selling booze in supermarkets? Probably since you've all your life. Yeah, but I mean, anyone here as old as me who remembers, was there a time in Poland? Oh, actually, of course, it wasn't Poland then, was it? No. Yeah, sorry, carry on. I'll stop rambling about this. I don't know. Presumably, you've always sold alcohol in supermarkets, have you, ever since you became liberated? I don't know.
Actually, availability of alcohol was was always quite available. I'm kind of worried because when there is a question about some country that's supposed to be a role model on regulating alcohol, everyone names Sweden. Is it like the only one? Aren't there any other countries?
Well, Norway does it, but it's so expensive, no one can drink there. There was a wonderful article by a British journalist a few years ago who said he decided to go skiing in Norway, and he's saying it was actually quite fascinating because he's quite well off. His wife was quite well off. We could only afford 1 bottle of wine a day, and we cherished every drop. And there's a moral in that. If you buy really expensive booze and cherish every drop, you get a lot of pleasure and less harm.
Or maybe a lot of black market booze.
I don't know if there's a big black market of booze in Norway. I mean, there is a bit in Sweden, yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the future of alcohol. Do you expect any significant changes in consumption patterns in 5, 10, 20 years? Or is it or we could have a similar conversation in a couple of years?
No, I think it's changing already. And what's interesting is that it's changing not as a result of government, it's changing as a result of young people becoming more aware of the harms of alcohol. You've got health hacking becoming sort of fashionable. People care about their health. They care about their work productivity. They don't want to be drunk and hungover during the week. So in Britain, we have this growing culture of low or no, either no alcohol at all or just at weekends. And that is massively impacting the drinks industry's profit. Their profits are beginning to fall. So for the first time for the last 50 years, the sales are going down. And the drinks industry now is trying to work out what to do about that. And it isn't going to solve that problem by increasing the consumption of alcohol. What it realizes, what it's got to do is give people alternatives. Now, up till now, the alternatives have been non-alcoholic versions of alcoholic drinks, which are expensive fakes. And that's one of the reasons I'm trying to find a third way, trying to find molecules which will give people the functional benefits of a small amount of alcohol, but without the harms, and give them. So if that succeeds, and I hope it will, then I think that will be a sea change in the nature of drinking over the next 20, 30 years.
I've read some interviews with psychotherapists, psychiatrists that were quite alarmed about the non-alcoholic beverages. Are you as well? That they might, cause addiction in some kind of back door, or they're safe in your opinion?
No, I mean, it's kind of weird, isn't it? You've got something which is opposed largely by the absolutists, the people that, the prohibitionists. You know, there are people who would prefer that no one drank any alcohol at all. And so that when they say, oh, look, these dry alcoholics could be tempted back in to bars by non-alcoholic drinks, and then when they're in the bar, they'll be drinking alcoholic drinks. So it's a kind of fear. The reality is abstinence, targeting abstinence in the whole population, that was tried. It was called prohibition. It was tried in America, in Sweden, and Norway. It failed catastrophically in those countries. So people don't want prohibition. What they want is access to alcohol, but they don't want to be harmed by alcohol. So I think fear-mongering about non-alcoholic drinks is actually, again, it's a classic example of create a problem that you can focus on and you might even solve. Maybe you could ban non-alcoholic drinks. Well, that would be great, wouldn't it? But that's what many of these activists want to do. They want to achieve something like banning vaping, even though it'll cause more harm overall. So it's a distorted way of thinking about things, I think.
I just want to ask you, like, for closing our wonderful debate here, discussion. You wrote your book in 2020, right? So some time has passed, like it's been 4 years. Was there something that you would erase from the book, or something that you would add? Something really big happened since the original book was published in the UK?
Well, we have launched an alternative. It's called Sentia. One of the problems, I have to say categorically, I was really, really sad about Brexit. It was an utterly stupid thing for the idiots in my country to do, and I really regret it. And because one of the reasons I regret it is selling Sentia to Europe is almost impossible because of the taxes and the customs restrictions. But we will be setting up soon a distribution center in the Netherlands, and then it'll be possible for you guys to get it without having to pay exorbitant amounts of tax. So yes, the next book will probably not have a picture of a beer bottle on the front. It'll have a picture of a Sentia bottle.
How does Sentia bottle look like? Does it have a bottle already?
Oh yeah, Sentia is it's a slightly more exotic bottle. It's Italian glass, of course. It's a dark. It's either got a dark red or a dark black liquid inside it. It looks like a spirit. It's just like a spirit bottle, and it is a spirit. You dilute it down with whatever your mixer might be, whether it's tonic or Coke or even apple juice.
Thank you so much, Professor David Nutt.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us and participating in this conversation. Today, it's a bit unusual for this place. We're not accepting questions, but you can ask some questions while you come here, and I'm sure Professor Nutt will sign your book and answer all your questions. Thank you.